been employed at the 1854 Treaty Authority since 1996. The 1854 Treaty Authority is an intertribal resource management agency governed by the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. The organization is charged to preserve, protect, and enhance treaty rights and related resources in the 1854 ceded territory. Darren has served as the Resource Management Division Director since 2018. In this role, he oversees programs including wild rice, wildlife, fisheries, environmental, climate, and invasive species, everything. So let's welcome Darren. Thanks, much.
Okay.
See if it'll advance. I'm not sure if it'll. I see it on my screen, so. You have to set it down. And move up here. Oops. Let me get that off the screen. I may just have to click it. I don't.
No, it's working on the screen at least there.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So, so you can see the bottom left button there. Yeah. There you go.
Okay, all right, let's see if this works. Looking on one right here. So thanks for having me. I think Martha gave me, I appreciate it. So I'm here to talk about Manoomin or wild rice. I mean, that's the Ojibwa lesson for tonight is Manoomin means wild rice. It's translated good seed or good berry. So we'll talk about wild rice restoration in St. Louis River Estuary. First, a little bit about 1854 Treaty Authority. So under the Treaty of 1854, bands retain the right to hunt, fish, and gather in that treaty area and in the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. And so I work for two of those bands. We're governed by the Boys Fort and Grand Portage band. So our real purpose is to allow band members to get out in that treaty area and exercise their treaty rights. So they don't need a state license to go hunting or fishing. We issue them an ID card. We register their deer, set the seasons, things like that. So the real reason we're here is to get band members out exercising their treaty rights in that area. But along with that, we're interested in the resources themselves. So then we want healthy walleye populations, moose populations, sturgeon, wild rice, things like that. So we cooperate a lot with the other agencies, land managers in that area to make sure the resources are protected for future generations. One thing about the Fond du Lac band, they have treaty rights in that same area. They're not part of our organization, but we work with them quite a bit as well since they have that treaty rights in that same area. Any questions along the way, feel free to shut them off too about time at the end.
Yeah, me too. There you go.
Probably most people are aware, so we're talking about St. Louis River Estuary here, kind of between Duluth and Superior. I'm sure most people are aware of where we're talking. So a little bit about the Manoomin presence in the estuary. First of all, this is a really cultural significant location. The Ojibwa migration story talks about how the Ojibwa migrated from the East Coast and migrated to the West. And so right here in Duluth, Superior, Spirit Lake, Spirit Island was a sixth stopping place on their migration story. They were told to migrate until they found where the food grows on water, which is wild rice, which was in the St. Louis River Estuary. So that area, specifically Spirit Lake and Spirit Island, is hugely culturally important to the Ojibwa. And just highlights again the wild rice presence that at some point was present down the estuary. I won't read all this. You can breeze through some of it, but we don't really have a formal documentation of what wild rice used to look like in the estuary. We have some reports, historical reports, how people say it used to be covered with wild rice. It was so thick you couldn't even see the channel in some places. So we know that wild rice did exist and was very prevalent down there. We just don't have formal documentation. You see at the bottom right here, there's this Hurdy navigational charts from 1861, and if you compare that to what the estuary originally looked like to now, some of the estimates was upwards of 7,000 acres of wild rice habitat loss that was either dredged or filled. So significant impact. The system has really changed over time. Wild rice was thought to exist, into the 60s even at least, where enough was to be harvested, and then through the 60s, by about 1970, it was pretty much wiped out between habitat changes, water pollution, things like that.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, we're just there.
I had to look.
So the original restoration works started in really the mid-90s, if people remember Larry Shortstop from the Fond du Lac band. So 1993 to 96, the Fond du Lac band tried some restoration work in the estuary. She did a little over 2,000 pounds of rice. They also try a little exposure work, we'll be talking a little bit more about that, but fencing off areas, what was impacting wild rice restoration? Was it carp? Was it geese? Back then, they even found out that their conclusion was geese was the problem as far as impacting, wild rice restoration, wild rice growth, so I'll be talking more about that. Bottom line from this early restoration work, my understanding, there wasn't a whole lot of success, I think we initially had some wild rice growth and then kind of petered out again, so, that was back in the, early mid-90s when Fond du Lac banned. So as conditions improved in the river, a lot of partners got together, John was very involved, to develop a wild rice restoration plan. So this was completed in 2014. A lot of partners worked together and identified areas where wild rice could be restored, factors to consider, things like that. So you can see the goal where there is to increase the abundance and distribution, to increase opportunities for harvest and also go towards some of the AOC beneficial use impairment removals. The objective from this plan was 275 acres by 2025. So great exercise. Partners worked together while developing this restoration plan in 2014. So now the plan was in place, we began, well, before I go that, I guess I'm gonna just mention all the partnerships. I really think this has become a model of partnerships from different agencies, organizations, nonprofits, private citizens even. Seems like people want to start to work with Manoomin, they really you kind of get bit by the bug, it becomes part of who you are. And so I think that really helps people get interested with wild rice. And so all these partners have been very active in all the work we do down there. And I do want to mention, Wisconsin DNR in particular, they did hire a coordinator position, Dave Grandmason is his name. He was actually supposed to talk tonight, so you got the B spot with me here tonight. But he's been very instrumental having that one point person to help kind of keep us moving all in the same direction together. Minnesota DNR has been very active, specifically installing some of the exposures I'm gonna talk about, dealing with some permitting issues. And I really gotta give credit to the Fond du Lac band, because the hard part of this is acquiring wild rice seed. You can't just order it online, you have to work with harvesters, show up at land, things like that. So the Fond du Lac band takes the lead on acquiring all the rice seed that's gone, and we'll talk more about that. So I'm definitely thankful for those partners. And different funding sources as well, we've utilized over the years.
Somehow it's conforming.
Thank you. Again, so restoration work started in 2015, and in some of the bays we had thick competing vegetation. And the idea is not to get a monoculture where it's all wild rice. It's going to be intermixed with all kinds of different vegetation, but some areas we needed to tip the balance a little bit towards wild rice. And so 8 locations, Fond du Lac band took their weed harvester down there to kind of open it up and remove some of the existing vegetation and give wild rice a foothold. So that happened a couple years in 2015 and 2016, and then since then, you can see all the seeding that's gone on. And again, that varies by year. You can see one year, 2018 and 2021 was a poor year for wild rice, so we had trouble getting much seed. So those years were down as far as seed acquisition. But since 2015, we're over 80,000 pounds of rice seed in 14 different bays. So it's really amazing to get 10,000-12,000 pounds of rice seed a year. And again, credit the Fond du Lac band for making that happen. Just a map of the areas. Again, most people here are probably familiar. Kind of down on north of Foundation Bay, there's Boy Scout Landing that we're going to be south a little bit. So most of our restoration areas are kind of upriver in the estuary, and we'll see a little bit more too. That those have been the most successful to date, but been focusing on those. Rice really like shallow water, 3 to 4 feet with mucky bottom. So that's the areas we're really focused on to try to restore wild rice. In our role, especially 1854 treaty authorities, we do the monitoring aspect of it. We want to try to track how is rice doing, are we making progress, are we seeing more acreage and more density. And so in short, we do a grid of points at each restoration area, about 40 points. We lay that plot over the side and count the number of rice stalks within that plot and measure one plant height, total plant height. So out of that, you get a biomass estimate. So that's what we really use to track rice over time and compare it across years. And this is standardized. We worked back with a bunch of partners in 2015 to kind of standardize this wild rice monitoring protocol. So people across the region are doing it in a similar way. So we follow the protocol line in this monitoring handbook, and it seems to be more and more people are are monitoring rice in the same way, so you can kind of compare apples to apples across the region. All right, some results here. I won't get too hung up on the numbers, but, the biomass estimate, so when we're seeing from the other lakes we monitor, we've been monitoring some wild rice water since '98. Results from that show like 100 to 300 is kind of your sweet spot where there's enough rice to harvest. So that's one thing you can compare here, is you can see some of those bays further upriver, Walleye Alley, Grass, Landslide, Duck Hunter Bay North, where you're starting to see some color besides red showing up that, we're getting in the territory there where it's thick enough rice to harvest this past season. So, that really starts to show the progress over time. Further downstream, we're not seeing as much progress, for different reasons. We've been really probably focusing a little bit more on the upstream sites to get them restored before we, spend some more time, dedicated time on some of the, more of the downstream sites. Again, some results, thing to focus on is a trend. You can see the last 2 to 3 years, 2021, 22, 23. Each of these bays, you can see this huge increase in biomass, especially in some of the bays that are really stand out again. It's the Grass, Duck Hunter North, Walleye Alley, Landslide Bay, and Eloise as well. So you can start to see the rice is really starting to get a foothold and taking off, increasing that density, the plant height, things like that. And just another representation, this is kind of showing the same thing, but in the density of stocks. And again, you can see 2021 and last 2 years, really starting to make some increase. So what has caused that? We can only control so much with wild rice in the estuary. Usually if you're trying to manage your wild rice, water levels is the first thing you address. Is there a beaver issue? Is the water too deep? You don't have that control in the estuary, right? So that's out of our control for what we can do. So seed acquisition, we can control that. We can try to get more rice seed in there. So it's available to grow the following year or in future years if conditions exist. So those are the things we focus on, is the seed acquisition and goose control, as I'm talking about. But the last few years, Lake Superior dropped what, foot, maybe 11 inches, 12 inches, and so that's really lowered the water level in the estuary. And I think that's a big contributing factor why we're seeing some increase. When we started our restoration work, it was some of those high water years, maybe highest ever on record, and so that was fighting us a little bit. But with some lower water levels and some goose control, I think we're starting to see some huge increases here. So I have a whole string of photos here we'll just zip through pretty quick, but just to show you an idea of how things are looking out there. So on the water, at some of our monitoring points, I've established photo points, I call them. So each year I try to take picture from the same spot in the same direction year after year, so you can kind of compare. I'm a big picture guy. My workers give me a hard time on the pictures I take, but it's cool to have. So this is Duck Hunter Bay North, one of the better bays, and we can kind of zip through photos. This is 2015, 2016, 17. You can start to see that green coming. 2018, 2021, a lot of progress, and then 2022, it's kind of a bad day for photo there. It was a little cloudy and hazy, but last couple of years, you can see how that rice has really come a long way from when we first started in 2015 there.
Wow.
Well, there's 2023 now, yeah. So it's, again, these rice areas, when they're good, looks like a field. You really on a natural rice lake, you think you're trying to do through a wheat field, you don't see any water. There's some people here may harvest, but that's kind of what we're looking for, working for the band, so we're interested in harvest back in the estuary is part of our goals for sure. Then I got the same thing for Walleye Alley Bay, and these are aerial photos. So this is in 2016. You can see that little island of vegetation. This is the year that Fond du Lac did some vegetation cutting out there. You can see that little silverish thing there. That's your weed harvester there. You can kind of tell where they cut, and they're just finishing up that last island there. So this is before any wild rice restoration took place, and they're doing some vegetation control in 2016. 2017, not much going on. That other vegetation is not wild rice. It's arrowhead, there's burrweed in there, probably some water lily, so there's not much wild rice showing up there yet. It's kind of hard to decipher some of these aerial photos. 2018, maybe about in that bottom left there, you're starting to see a little wild rice coming. Otherwise it's very sparse and pretty tough to pick up in photos. 2019, the rice is a really light kind of greenish tan, kind of tough to see there. Maybe not a whole lot happening yet. 2020 similar, maybe not a whole lot happening, but now 2021, you can see up in that upper corner there, and you can start to see that rice rice filling in there. 2022, kind of left side and upper north part of the bay, same thing, and then 2023, you can see really pop this year. All that kind of green is most of that's wild rice, so. Again, just a display of the progress that's happening, you can take your own each season.
Darren, when it gets like that, you have a lot of natural seed coming down. I mean, you're putting 12,000
Yeah.
pounds in, but then all of a sudden you have a lot of natural seed falling in the water.
Correct, yeah, at some point, I mean, it's gonna see itself better than what we can do. So that's definitely a benefit, we can get at least a thicker stance on the goal is self-sustain. I should also mention that when wild rice seed falls off, it doesn't necessarily grow the next year, it's an annual plant going from seed each year, but a lot of times the seed remains in the sediment until favorable conditions exist, so. Even if we're establishing that seed bank, the thought is, when future conditions are good, that rice can come back. I've heard stories of, we haven't seen rice in this lake for 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden maybe a beaver dam pulls out or something, and boom, wild rice is back, so that sediment stays in the seeds. Seed stays in the sediment until conditions are favorable, so. We talk a lot about the goal is, maybe we have a bad year, but we're still establishing the seed bank. One more photo from, same point from 2017 to 2023, and just see like looking in the same direction, just, complete difference in all animals.
So Darren, do you, have much use information when it comes to this thing?
No, we'll talk about that. So, when the rice gets thicker like that, the geese tend to stay out. And so that is really the goal that, we realize it's not gonna be thick like that everywhere, but at least some pockets, if we can get it thicker like that, hopefully it'll be kind of withstand the loose pressure. I'll throw some photos of some of the exposures as well, but they tend to not like that real thick vegetation. Yeah, so on to, what's impacting our success. I mentioned, we can control seed acquisition to the best we can with availability. Water levels are a huge impact. We don't really have any control on that here. And the other thing is geese. Almost every plant, and especially the sparkers that stands up, is getting mowed down by geese. As soon as the plant stands out of the water in late June, early July, just all mowed down. All, so, we're not getting plants developed to get that seed source for future years. And so what we worked on is, a couple different things, before I talk about that, you can see the picture. This is Kingsbury Bay from this past year. It's kind of hard to see on the left, but that's the aerial photos. You can see those 4 plots on the left hand of the screen. Within the fenced off areas, pretty good rice grow with outside that area, basically none. Geese have just decimated the wild rice in that area. So we tried different things over the years, ribbons on swivels on poles, blowing in the wind to keep geese out, but that didn't really work.
Last summer when I walked on that trail past those exposures, a lot of them were broken down and pushed down by big geese or whatever. And the geese were inside it.
Did you see geese inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had reported that. I think we went out and tried it out. I don't think Dave from Wisconsin, went out and tried to fix it afterwards, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if the geese actually did that or if it was a weather event, yeah. And I also saw a little side note, in these spots here in particular, a lot of broken stalks inside the fenced area, and so I was thinking, what the heck was that? I think it was red-winged blackbirds, because I was there and whole flock of them come out and they were just hard on the stock. So it's other things than geese that can impact rice, but when it's standing up, you can see a lot of times flocks of red-winged blackbirds in there.
At the, St. Louis River Summit a week or so ago, they were talking about in this bay, they found milk whales. And I'm wondering, did you think it came in on the equipment that was coming in to do the restoration work?
Yeah, so we've been talking about that. We can see, we think a lot of this kind of darker here might be the Eurasian milfoil, and someone just discovered it last year, so we had some discussions about it last fall, and it's tough to know. I mean, it raises questions like if the equipment brought it in, but I know it's found elsewhere in the estuary as well.
Yeah, it's done, we identified it 15 years ago.
In Kingsbury?
Not Kingsbury, way down
Okay.
by Pickle Pond, that area.
Yeah.
So it could easily.
Yeah, we think so. We're gonna try to do a better job this year identifying where it currently exists in the estuary and get a better handle on where it exists here. Obviously we don't want that in the estuary to begin with. It's a little unknown what is the impact to rice. The rice seems to be doing okay within the exposure where milk always exists as well. So our goal this year is to assess a little bit more, map it out and discuss, is there any way to really do much about it? It's not an easy task. I've heard some people talk about handling, pretty labor intensive, and maybe you could make a dent, but there's something like that. Yeah. Some paddlers, I know, I think there were some students from University of Wisconsin Superior, I think St. Louis River Mines hired some paddlers to try to get in and kind of haze geese out of these restoration areas, and again, it's effective, but how much can you really, stay on top of that day after day and all day long, so. So that gets us to some of our goose roundup work. Well, goose exposures first, so the way we've been constructing these is approximately 20 feet by 100 feet, and a lot of times it's been the snow fencing. We've tried some other things, some metal fencing, even just some string. That'd be easier. That seems to work all right too. It's most of the time you use this orange snow fencing, and you get kind of double bang for the buck as we're talking about the geese stay out of the thick area. So the orange fencing there, that area down the middle is actually between two of the exposed areas, and you can see it's just as thick. So the geese tend to stay out, even between the exposures. You kind of can double your area with that area. When it gets thick like that, the geese tend to stay out. It's kind of hard to see in this picture. You can barely see all these orange fenced off areas here, but that shows where the exposures were this past season in Duck Hunter North, and you can see all around there, the rice is thick, obviously within the exposures, but even in between and around as well. Geese tend not to like that taller, thicker rice. And then the exposures we've done, you can see this last year, 49 were put in. So again, this is pretty labor intensive, and so a lot of partners have helped with that. And I wasn't a big fan of exposures at first. I thought it was helpful to show what the problem was, but not solve the problem, if that makes sense. So at first we'd explore some areas and okay, it's obviously geese are the problem, but now what? But these exposures, it has helped. Again, I think that double your bang for the buck, the area around and in between you're getting for it, that the exposures have really helped quite a bit. You get them in the spring, take them on the fall, so yeah, it's more.
Will you have to continue that indefinitely, or does the wild rice get to a certain stage where you can pull fences, or unknown at this point?
Yeah, that's definitely the hope, is that, if we can get this bay like this, looking like this for a couple of years, I think we would need to do explore. So that's the hope we need. We want rice to be self-sustaining. It needs to find its niche again down there without, fencing, goose removal and things like that. So, that is the goal. And it's hard to get a real idea of what the goose population is. Back in 2018, we worked with some partners to do weekly flights over the estuary, and Dave looked at some of that data, and he really saw a peak in goose activity right when the rice was standing out of water. It was interesting, because that's when they're seeing it just decimated, like goose just mowing it down, like I was saying. Some students installed some trail cameras in some of the bay to try to get an idea of goose numbers. During some flights in 2022, the people on the planet, estimated 850 to 1150 geese estuary wide. The day they were up, probably was more than that, but that's, the number they came up to give us some kind of ballpark idea of what we're dealing with down there. So this leads to goose roundups. There's a period of time, end of June-ish, early July, where geese can't fly, and so they're susceptible to round them up. In the estuary, we do a kind of a fleet of vessels, canoes and boats, and you find a raft of geese and herd them to onshore, and then you can use these fence panels to capture them. And this can be a little controversial, to be honest. We don't want to remove one species for the benefit of another, but in this case, it seems to really be necessary and help wild rice to get a foothold. And so this has been done the last 3 seasons. You can see how many geese are removed from the system. USD Wildlife Services was really instrumental in helping get the work done. It took a lot of coordination and planning with Minnesota DNR, Wisconsin DNR. We hit a snag on the Minnesota side a couple of years there, finally got that figured out. So really coordinated effort the last 3 years. I think the plan is to do it at least one more year. And again, the hope is that this isn't something we need to keep doing. That rice can find its spot, and this isn't something you have to have to do it. At least every year, maybe it's an occasional thing, I'm not sure, we're still kind of feeling out, what's needed there. And again, looking at some of our monitoring data, it's hard to tease out goose impact. We try to make a note when we're out there monitoring, what is the goose impact, none, high, low. So we have some handle on that. You can see the percentage of the plots with some kind of goose impact. And back in 2017, it was almost all, and now we're down to about 70%. So we think it is helping between the exposures, keeping geese out, and the goose removal. We are seeing some less goose impact, but again, it's still pretty high at 70%. So it's still a huge impact. And again, I mentioned that hopefully these efforts carry over across years. The work we did in 2022 seemed to even carry over to 2023. So there's some kind of cumulative effect, I think, of some of this goose removal. Again, we don't have to do it, perpetually moving forward.
What happens to the geese when you remove?
Yeah, very good question. I should have mentioned that. A mix of things. First year we were able to utilize all of them. The zoo took them, where they call them animal enrichment. They use it for food source at the zoo. Some were landfill, unfortunately. This past year we had some that were used for a food pantry. So the goal is to utilize the birds. I mean, that is what we want to do. And again, I realize that, there's been some controversy in the media, and I understand people are feelings about it, which are all totally valid. So if we do remove geese, we want to try to do this.
Maybe talk about testing, Darren.
Yeah, past year before we could donate them to the food pantry, they had to be tested. I think they went to Wisconsin side, if I remember correctly. So Wisconsin, I don't know who tested them over there, but to see if they're safe for consumption. So we were able to make use of a bunch of the birds tested.
So we had to test 10% of the birds that we were gonna donate to the food shelf, and it was $300 per test, per bird, and then $30 per bird for processing to grind them up for human consumption. So we could only afford to do 10% of the birds that we donated. So, and the year before, we could not donate them either to the zoo or for human consumption because of influenza concerns. So they had to be landfilled that year. Nobody would take them. The zoo wouldn't even take them. Concerns about avian influenza in their animals and their grounds. So, yeah.
Has there ever been any kind of like relocation program?
Rich and I can tell you about that early in our careers. We actually, when I worked in northwestern Minnesota and Rich worked in southwest and up here, we used to take birds from the Twin Cities and we would take them all over the state, and that was our job. And now the person that was heavily involved in that program is the one and only person who's licensed to control geese at the Twin Cities, and he writes all the plans for municipalities and wrote our plan for the city of Duluth to control the geese. So no, they've saturated the state, and so no, there's no plans to relocate for anyplace else.
The goose population is interesting in the St. Louis estuary. When I came to Cloquet in 1980, there was just a few geese, and there were actually molt migrants coming up from Missouri. And at that time, they were the only geese in the estuary. And then over time, we don't know if it was those birds or maybe some of the birds we released, started nesting in the estuary. And of course, that has built up to a huge population of 2,000 or more geese probably. But it's kind of an interesting history of how they got there. And I'm sure they must have been there originally to some extent, but probably not. I mean, man's activities tends to create ideal habitat for geese, so this is probably more geese than were there originally.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I've wondered for a long time now. These are mostly all the giants
Right.
that we
The
worked
nesting
so
ones,
hard
yeah.
to reestablish in the 80s. Is it possible that the common Canada, or that we had very few geese 200-300 years ago? And, it just fascinates me to try to figure out why. And the area's been lush with rice historically. And we have waterfalls historically. So anyway, we probably won't have answers to those questions. But,
Well, it's a good point. It's hard because the pendulum is always swinging. Everything's always changing, and it's hard. It's always something. Yeah.
Darren, have you ever considered using a drone to gauge the geese? Or use a drone to plant the rice?
Good point. We probably talked about it for hazing geese, and again, it's how to stay on top of that, almost like a paddler deal, you know?
They tried it in Wisconsin, yeah, and it wasn't very successful. But for seeding, I don't know that we need to, because we have so many volunteers and other folks that want to seed that we haven't, but we sure could. Yeah.
Is there any sense that the trumpeters that are now becoming more common are gonna mimic the geese in a bigger form?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that. So I've been looking at some wild rice lakes inland in Minnesota for, 25 years, and I never used to see swans. Every rice lake up north has swans on it. I tend not to see as much damage from a pair of swans as I do a whole flock of geese, but, I heard John mention the Fond du Lac on one of their lakes 3-4 years ago, all of a sudden had this huge problem with 80 swans on their lake, and it just wiped it out. Completely wiped it out. And you see some lakes, you'll see it all of a sudden in the spring, I'll see 40-50 geese hanging out on a small rice lake for a month or something. So I think it is an emerging concern that swans may, I don't know, pest, but could be pesky at some point, yeah.
Well, Margo and I have watched a pair of trumpeters drive 24 honkers off the water and angle inlet. And once the honkers were in the air, those swans kept after them until they disappeared.
Well, they did. I've heard that. I've never really seen it. But
That's a good thing. If you get a pair of swans, they'll keep the geese off the lake or the bay. And so even people down in the harbor on Minnesota Point, who are having goose problems, if they put out coyote decoys and that kind of thing, the geese would walk right past them. After a while, they have swan decoys and the geese would go on to the next house down or whatever else. So swans definitely keep the geese out of there. They can be a problem, like at the lake at Fond du Lac that had 40 of them that just decided to set up there. And then they kind of hazed them off and they had a limited hunt for them, shot a few. And then they lifted up and took off to other lakes further north. And then we would find pockets of, 5 to 10 or whatever. So they could have an impact, but for now, they're just setting up in pairs. And so we think that they've been hanging out long enough in the upper estuary that we might get a nesting pair this year, maybe cygnets, but we'll see. There's like 80 of them out there now.
is there not many? Because I would say I don't see swans in the upper estuary, but I've heard there's a few around now. I haven't seen any.
I've been around.
Is there?
Okay.
The other thing I can talk about hazing geese is I know the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Wildlife Services, they use like sound cannons is another thing. We talked about that. Seems like the geese get used to that and then after, with the neighbors like hearing that thing booming all the time. I don't know. There's no easy answer to this, unfortunately.
We've tried every non-lethal mean that you can think of, between Wisconsin DNR, Minnesota DNR, universities, the, St. Louis River Alliance, the Reserve, hired students, did research, put out cameras, everything, and we've tried everything before we went to the roundup. So, and just nothing was working, and we're looking at this as an annual, and if it doesn't repeat itself every year, then we're throwing money and seed literally, away. And it's amounting to nothing, all because of the geese.
Well, you've been successful because you figured out what doesn't work. There's something out there that could work.
Yeah.
Because you could have a drone out there, you could have a speaker on it, you could do something.
Yeah.
And you could have one operator that could take the place of 100 people. With the drone that's out there, maybe hazing it and using some whatever. Fox barking, I don't know. There's something out there.
Take a look at the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe that's what we could have a strong drone.
I think we have someone in our group that has their license to operate as a drone. So maybe that's where we'll go if we're not doing roundups anymore or don't need exposures, but we'll have to have that constant hazing.
presence there, just to kind of keep them at a low level. And, you know, Darren showed the graph of the numbers of geese in the estuary. We're not out to eliminate all the geese from the estuary. And we know that we're working way up in the northern end, just in the rice bays. And if we're down there, I used to ban the geese, with Rich and others, throughout the estuary, all the way down to Minnesota Point. And there'll be 3,000 geese down in the port entry. And, you know, up where we are, we're talking, you know, maybe 200. So that's what we're focusing on, is just the rice bays. We're not trying to wipe geese out, you know, of the entire estuary or the harbor.
Whoever, I think it was Rich Staffen that said a year or two ago, whether there was any opportunity to mitigate the damage to wild rice by the honkers we have, by finding opportunities to put in attractive grass fields adjacent to the wild rice beds. They seem to love every bit of grass that they can find. Is that, have you talked about that at all?
No, we have some neighbors that are doing just that.
Yeah, I just wonder if that would promote geese. They tend to love that area. I hear what you're saying, they love the grassy area, but then they end up in the water at some point too. We've worked with a lot of neighbors even going through their property for access, and in general, property owners have been pretty supportive of this, you know, for their own reasons. The removing geese is equal, I think, and droppings thing, so I think there's people on both sides of this issue, but wild rice was a tool to do some of this, but I think there's been secondary benefits, and I don't want to be wild rice labeled just the bad guy in this either, because I think there's other interests at play more about that.
Well, I think most people are very supportive. But it is an interesting conundrum.
It is.
Someone asked online also about loons and ducks. How are they, have you done, seen anything with loons and ducks? They're just asking
As
about.
far as like impact on rice.
Yeah.
Yeah, not loons so much, but yeah, ducks, waterfowl, love ducks. If you're a duck hunter, you look for wild rice. So, yeah, ducks have some impact, but we don't see that mowing down of all plants. I mean, they may nip some leaves, they may die beneath the seed, but not like these do now.
And loons eat fish, if that was the question, Molly, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, they just asked about, yeah, loons aren't divers.
Plants.
Darren, a few years ago, our chapter met with WLSSD, and one of the concerns we raised was the amount of sulfate that disposes into the river. Now, mostly goes downstream, but the SACE does carry some of it quite a ways upstream. Have you guys looked into that at all? Do you think that's possibly having some impact on the rice?
Well, it is, it's a tricky one. So I've been involved in this whole wild rice standard debate for 15 years, I suppose. So people probably aware there's a state standard, water quality standard of 10 parts per million for sulfate. Really hasn't been enforced. There's some specific instances where it's really high and having to impact rice. Upstream, the whole St. Louis River watershed, you have the whole mining district that, you know, that sulfate signature is still seen down in the estuary. And I think we've done a little testing on sulfate. I think don't quote me, it's 20 to 30 parts per million in the upper estuary, so above the state standard. Yeah, so we're wondering, is that an impact? It's such a tough thing to tease out, and I'm gonna mention on the last slide, but we're gonna do some work coming up the next year or two here. I think it's University of Wisconsin-Madison is gonna try to look at that a little bit more in the estuary, look at sediment and pore water. What are the sulfate levels? Is that potentially an impact? And is that hurting some of our restoration work? So it is on the radar, yeah.
You had mentioned carp earlier, and I didn't hear, maybe you said more about it, but have you made any determination on what impact they have? Because I could imagine them doing a lot of damage.
Yeah, there's a lake in Wisconsin where carp wiped out the wild rice. They root around and just uproot the plants essentially. So they did a big carp removal and netted off the entrance to a bay, and they showed that carp was the problem. So we did wonder that out here. There was one bay in particular, Duck Hunter North, where it has a couple small access points where we netted those off to keep fish out. In the middle, we used trap nets and electric fishing to try to remove any carp. You know, there's no way we can get it 100% right, but our estimate is that carp isn't the significant problem down there. It could be some, but again, what you're seeing is those standing plants. So the plants are standing, but they're getting more down, so it's these. But I think perhaps something that's still on our radar that could be worth considering. So yeah, we're also trying to get the word out on wild rice. We really want people that know about wild rice, have that relationship. Again, it's such a culturally important plant to the Ojibwa. It's not, I didn't even say it's not an it's a being, it's a relative. So those are the concepts we try to share with people. So in 2023, us with many of our partners had a wild rice camp. I think it was all week long, based out of Chambers Grove and then Perchside Park there. The first day was for resource management professionals to really get them that experience, exposure, that relationship with wild rice. And so that was the first day. We had, staff from DNR, pollution control agencies, whatnot, come down and really get experience to canoeing out on rice, try some poling, try some knocking of wild rice. And then rest of the week, we had school students, I think it was 17 schools, over 500 students. We had to turn away schools. There was just so much interest in it. So yeah, get the kids out in the wild rice, try a little bit of knocking, poling. I don't think we had anyone tip over, if I recall, but I think I saw one picture of a full in the water, but they're still floating. So. And then at Chambers Grove, just in the wild rice processing, you can see them showing them all the parts of wild rice there. So the interest in wild rice, to me, is just exploding the last 3 years, 5 years. It's just crazy. So hugely successful. We were actually kind of overwhelmed. I think we plan to do it again though, and see how many people we can handle each year. But yeah, and we'll look up more information about that. Yep. Yeah, kind of what's in the future. Gonna keep up this heating yet. And hopefully some of these bays that have really come established by themselves, we can even move on to other locations that they can start to take care of themselves. Keep up on the goose stuff with the exposures and removal in the short term at least, continuing our animal monitoring. There's been different work on different aerial imagery. The NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, did some flights probably 4 or 5 years over the estuary called paper spectral imaging to try to identify wild rice. There's been some other work with drones trying to take photos of wild rice to see if you can track density and acreage on that. So there's some more work planned on that in the estuary. We plan to study to test any toxicity in rice. I mean, with the long history in the estuary, is the rice safe to eat? If it is, we'll do a little more work there just to ensure that, again, we want to get harvest back. Is the rice safe for consumption? We talked about the sulfate stuff already there. Maybe a little bit more work on what is the actual impact of herbivory from geese, and are there other methods we can do to help control that a little bit? I mentioned another wild rice camp. And working an updated wild rice restoration plan. The original plan was completed in 2014. We got it about done. Dave from Wisconsin DNR is heading that up. I think he's about a final draft. So that should come out in the next month or so, I would guess. So some updated information, what we've learned over the last 10 years and kind of where we're headed. And again, the goal, I've kind of said this a few times already, is we want self-sustaining wild rice. And again, we're interested in some opportunities for harvest down there, get harvest back in the estuary. That's another kind of Ojibwa teaching that wild rice is a gift that must be used. If it's not used, it'll go away. So that harvesting is a real important aspect of wild rice, health, I think. And I think that's it. We do have an annual monitoring report available. That's on our website. I also brought some stuff back here, hats, mugs, some brochures about treaty rights, about rice. Please take it so I'm taking home. Don't be shy, grab that stuff. That I can take any other questions.
There's someone online here. A question about waterfall other than geese comes from our experience on Snowbank Lake, 20 miles east of Ely. We almost never see Canada goose there, but the wild rice is being decimated most years where their stands are not really thick and most stands remain sparse. We see some mergansers, so they may be culprits, no. There are also beaver and river otters. That's the person who asked about.
They don't need rice.
Yeah, so they don't, yeah.
Yeah, so was asking what was the impact there?
They're just saying they don't see Canada geese,
Okay.
but something is decimating their rice and they're wondering who could be the culprits.
Yeah, another little side note, I don't know if Snowbank, but we've done some work with rusty crayfish in wild rice. You'll see a rusty crayfish impacting rice. And we found in same thing, we developed exposures and some we tried to keep rusties out, some we loaded with rusties, and the ones we loaded with rusties, they did wipe out the rice. Seems like the rusties and the rice tend to have a little different habitat, the rusties tend to have a little more rocky gravel and the rice likes the mucky, and so we're a little unsure how much impact, but rusty crayfish could be part of the issue there, if they're in snowbank, I'm sure.
Good buddy of mine does a lot of ricing and said there's a lot of genetic variability in the rice. Some rice does better in the water, some better in shallower water. Are you using different seed sources in the estuary to try to find which ones might do better there?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. This whole rice genetics and where you get rice seed is, kind of a point of debate, I guess. Our goal has been getting it from as many places as we can. Locally and regionally, we don't want, we want to make sure it's northern wild rice, but I've heard this from Peter Davis, kind of one of my mentors I work with. He said, may the best rice win. I mean, kind of put it in and see what happens. And so the whole genetic thing is, there's been a lot of debate over the years. Should it become all within the same watershed? It's kind of been moved all over the years, so it's really a tough one to wrap your head around.
I've heard some guys talk, there's a difference between rice that grows in rivers and rice that grows in lakes. Have you tried both lake ends?
We have, yeah, and, I think at first we were probably trying to do it, again, this is Final Act, who does the seeding, where I think we do have a track of the seed source and which location, so we can maybe keep some of that out. But yeah, we have a mix of river rice, bowl rice, lake rice, a little bit of everything.
Darren, right near the end, you made that reference to the Ojibwa statement about wild rice is a gift, and if you don't use it, it goes away. That makes me, is there something wrong there that, the Ojibwa experience with wild rice, that needs to be harvested? Is there more than the statement there, or just an appreciation?
Yeah, I think it is appreciation and the cultural importance and that cultural tie, but I mean, we thought about this too, is there a physical reason why that helps? And one thought is the push pulling and disturbs the bottom.
Right.
Rice likes that disturbance. Maybe that pulling and cooling around is actually kind of tilling bottom up and helping the rice. We tried that in other areas. We're not getting good rice restoration. We've actually drug bed springs around and things like that to try to turn up the bottom. Muskrats is another thing that, when I first started, I thought muskrat could be a pest of wild rice, they could rip wild rice up, but I've been told they're kind of the gardeners and the cleaner of the lake, and so again, they're maybe controlling vegetation and stirring up that bottom, so I think there's something to that disturbance from harvest as well.
Interesting.
It seems like there's a good opportunity to look at sulfates, and with those downstream beds not doing as well, and Kingsbury being very isolated and quite far down, just sort of tracking sulfate levels and rice density or something.
Yeah.
Is a interesting possibility.
Well, I think so. There's been quite a bit of research, like at UMD in particular, they've grown rice and they call them mesopod, and basically outdoor containers, and that's where a lot of the information came about the actual impact. You can see, rice foliage declines over time, essentially. Every generation, you get shorter plants, smaller seeds, it just peters out with higher sulfate. And some of that evidence shows that if you stop the sulfate, well, then that rice can come back. So, there's some hope we can, clean up our act in some cases.
Yeah, I got kudos and an anecdote of my own. When I was working on this and kind of getting the money to make it happen, I was really concerned about like our benefit we were getting for the money we were spending. But now it looks, I'm overjoyed and I was always on the goose is the problem that way. So I'm happy that we're controlling some geese, and I'm happy that we're getting really good results. So that's outstanding, great work. And then an anecdote, Talus Island Bay, remember we restored that in 2010? Yeah, that was it was woods, emergent wetland, it was like a marsh. And we restored 20 acres of open water there. The very next year, when we came in and looked at what was going on, looking at vegetation, there was wild rice coming up. Which means that after we dredged that out, that rice had been there now for probably 30 years
Yeah.
in that sediment. And the year after we dredged it up, there was rice coming up. Not a lot, but there were rice plants.
Yeah, I remember that, like I said, we didn't see there at all, rice come back, so, yeah, it really is that, just the longevity that rice can remain there for the right conditions, yeah, it's really interesting. I do want to thank John, he was really instrumental in that first wild rice plan to getting us going, so, yeah, important partnership, thanks for all your work on this.
Yeah, I'm
But like
glad.
you say, it's cool to see progress, sometimes you're in your office, you email and reports, but it's cool to see, like, conditions improving in short periods.
If once the wild rice stand is established, is there a fisheries benefit to those wild rice stands that used for nursery areas? or-
Yeah, they say, and I can't give you exact species, but they say, yeah, it's beneficial to, fisheries for, nursery habitat, erosion control, there's all kinds of fish and wildlife that they use, right, solar rails, you always see rails and wild rice, so it's just a important part of a healthy ecosystem.
We have a note from Melissa Thompson. Good work, Darren.
Oh,
And SLRE at Restoration. Thanks for offering Zoom.
oh yeah, I work with,
Okay.
DNR Tower, and my rice partner on a lot of work projects we do, so thank you, yeah.
All right, well, thank you,
Yeah.
Darren, for a great. Please stick around. That's the end of our, presentation, but for those of you that are here in the room, there's cookies. They had the Oreos with the spring cream filling in them, so I had to get those, so. One opportunity I didn't mention at the beginning is Molly is set up to sell banquet tickets with Square on her phone. So if you have a credit card and you would like to buy banquet tickets tonight, we're getting technologically savvy and she can sell you your tickets. Otherwise, you will be hearing from us. And just a reminder, no meeting here in April, but we will hope to see you all at the Buffalo House. And we'll be back here in May, on May 15th, with a presentation from John Pastor, who's going to talk about his book, White Pine, the Natural and Human History of a Foundational American Tree. I haven't read it myself, but I've heard wonderful things about it, and John's does great presentations. So hope we'll see you there for that. And that's the end of our meeting. This is recorded. Rich will send out the link for those who want to share it, or if you didn't, for those who weren't able to be here tonight. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Molly, for the tech support as usual.
You don't want to hit it.
And for those of you who are able, if you would please pick up your chair and bring them up to the front, that would be great. If you're